Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose. Affirmative.
Okay, boys and girls, back to it again on the Investigative Journal. We got a lot to talk about today, and it's the day after President's Day. Greg Anthony here, and it's the day, like I said, the day after President's Day, and every President's Day I think about how many presidents have been killed by the Jesuits and the Vatican-led New World Order. Over the years, we've collected probably information on at least 7. Now, going back in history, we know that murder does not have a statute of limitations. And there's a lot of circumstantial evidence as well as some solid evidence that the Jesuits get involved in knocking off the highest people in our office if they do things they just aren't supposed to do on their way to this quest for a new world order. Now, most people in the mainstream, or even the alternative news, would question what I say. But, you know, we're not going to dwell on the names, as we've talked about some of the famous ones, like Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, are 2 that come to mind. But what about, a couple things I always like to talk about is William Henry Harrison, and what happened to Taylor, Buchanan, and other presidents when they go up against the mighty hand of the Jesuits. And if you want to research it yourself, just look up President Harrison, put in how many presidents have the Jesuits killed. And funny, one of my shows comes up as one of the first thing that pops up on YouTube. And when you start really researching it, there aren't many people that have taken a serious look at this. And I can name them on one hand. But anyway, check it out. I'm not going to spend the whole show doing that because I'm going to talk about certain things that are happening in the news today. Oh, by the way, I did a YouTube a long time ago called Hollow Towers and Fake Deaths. And I received a message from YouTube that it has been censored because it has inappropriate and offensive ideas. They said, well, you can access it, but we're going to limit some of the things on there, like no more. On that particular video, you can't comment on it. It doesn't say how many people watched it. And I really don't like that number anyway, because if you click on something for 1 second, that goes as a hit, right? But I have noticed that the more hits you get on these YouTubes are usually some frivolous YouTube, and they get millions of hits, and then the real important ones are down in the hundreds. So you kind of know what's on people's minds. But anyway, I thought about it, so I went to that video, and it says in black, it's a big black screen, and it says, inappropriate and offensive language, but you can click on it if you want. So I clicked on it, and there it was. And I said to myself, first, there's 2 things going on here. One, how many pornographic videos do they allow up on the web? If you ever see the crap that's up there, and that's not offensive at all, I mean, there's certain things that are so goddarn offensive. I mean, everything that the Jesuits put up on their website should be offensive if you knew the truth, because they're lying out their teeth, and it's all deception, right? But then I said, people, when they see that, they may click on it, because they really want to find out what's offensive and inappropriate. So maybe I get more views when they do that, so go on, do it. Who cares? You're not going to control them anyway. I mean, probably one of their biggest problems in the world are these big tech companies right now that really can control thought processes. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. YouTube, Facebook, and all these things are basically controlled sites that gather information and basically can control content, can control outcomes of what is listened to, what isn't listened to. And so the stories that they want to basically get rid of, they can do that. But, outside of the presidents being killed, we got to look at how this Jesuit Vatican-led New World Order stages terror attacks, wars, genocides. I mean, this has been going on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it never ends. What about what's going on in Venezuela now? Now, who do you think was behind that? I mean, this was a country, I was talking to some people that lived in Venezuela 15, 20 years ago. Very prosperous, great country. People were eating. Now we got 80% poverty. We got a dictator that was probably selected by the same powers that we talk about. And guess what? If you know anything about the Jesuit fourth vow, you'll know that the Jesuit General is a pretty powerful guy. Now, I believe if you read a book, it's called The Black Pope by written in 1896 by M.F. Cusack. Okay? And his quote on the Jesuits is really interesting because he claimed, after studying it, that only about 2% of all Jesuits ever get to this fourth vow. And he said a Jesuit is not permitted to take this full and final vow until he is about 45 years old. As a consequence, he said, there are a few fully professed members of the order that we talk about that are engaged in this high-level deception. And he goes on to talk a number of things. That's a great book to get. It's M.F. Cusack's book, The Black Pope, written in 1896. They knew more about the Jesuits then than we do now. So I think there's the more we get this technical world surrounding us, the less we really get a chance to read some of the important things that people before us wrote. So anyway, I always like to pick up one of their Jesuit generals from 1706 and 1730 said this: "See, sir, from this chamber I govern not only to Paris, but to China, not only to China, but to all the world, without anyone knowing how I do it." Nothing changes with them. Do you think from the time this guy was in office to now that the Jesuit general's any different? And is it a coincidence that Father Sosa, the Jesuit general now, is actually from Venezuela and he took over the reins in 2016? Usually Jesuit generals, if you look up their history, it's a post that they hold for life. But recently we've had some really great turnovers. We had Father Hans Kolvenbach a number of years back, who decided to resign so he could go to the Middle East and Syria and make sure that that revolution and that chaos continues. Then we had Adolfo Nicolas. He just resigned, and wherever he is, we'll have to really check on him. But now they got Sosa in there, who's actually from Venezuela. So he was, I believe, instrumental in fomenting the Vatican Jesuit government of choice, and that is fascism. And if you don't believe it, start reading a little bit about Pope Pius XII and Mussolini and their little cozy relationship. And I can't get into it because it would take the whole show. But go ahead and do it on your spare time, because I'm telling you, when you start getting behind the secret of all secrets, you'll find some interesting things about these people. And if you don't think they're in control, let's just talk a little bit about Venezuela. It doesn't have to be that way, but what do we have now? 80% of the people in poverty. We have now 60 countries that back the new president that isn't being recognized yet. And we have Maduro, who's decided to be a dictator there, supported by, 50 countries? So we got it split down the middle. The United Nations has not recognized the president that the United States wants to recognize. And basically what they're doing is fomenting a revolutionary war, maybe. Now, I think the whole thing boils down to whether they decide they want to do it or not, or whether they've killed off and gotten rid of a number of Venezuelan people so that they can basically control their resources and reformat that country in the manner that they choose. But if you're talking about is a war going to break out there, it all boils down to the generals, the military, because we have the people left in Venezuela who are starving, and then we have the military who's still behind Maduro, and you know the top generals have been paid off. They own all the businesses. They get all the money, all the food. But it boils down to the rank and file. Will the rank and file military, how long can they put up with seeing their fellow countrymen starve? And then will they be willing to shoot and kill their own fellow countrymen? That's where we're at now. And it's a very interesting situation. Let's see what happens. I believe it's already been orchestrated to the end, because really the ends justify the means, right? And lately you hear that on the mainstream being a slogan of the left wing in America and socialism. And isn't it interesting, just as you see the falling of this chaos in Venezuela, we have this socialist push by the left wing in America. It's all orchestrated, folks. It can't be any other way. And I can't imagine any of you out there. Look, they've divided America in half. We got half of the population, and most of the people are ignorant of what we talk about in this show. And not because they wouldn't, if they could actually get it somewhere, the information, but just that it's been kept from them. There's been such a controlled writing of our history that people don't really get the bottom line of what these people are all about. And so we have these people now going, isn't it interesting that Trump came on the scene with this nationalistic view of America, make America great again? And then you see the other side now pushing for socialism. So where's America going to go in the future? It hangs in the balance right now, most people think. But no, it's going to go to a socialist country. It may not be in the lifetime of the baby boomers or even the generation behind them, but it will be here. And they're just getting people used to it. What do you think? You know, look at Maduro, then look at the new president of Mexico. He's an avowed socialist. Then we got this new socialism cropping up in America, where they're saying, the left wing is saying, hey, take down all those border fences. Trump says, no, we got to put them up. But if you think that Trump is on the level, well, sure he is. He's pushing this message. But he was put there. Now, I happened to listen just the other day to Trump in 2013 go on the David Letterman show. Remember David Letterman, the late night talk show host that was there for many, many years on, what was it, NBC, then he went to CBS, I believe. Well, Trump was on in 2013, and he made a real interesting statement, and it really confirmed my feeling that he was placed in there by the Jesuits. Now, here's what happens. He comes out dressed like he is today, with that red tie, exactly like he is today. He looked a little bit younger. And he sat down, and they started talking about his family. And then he started saying he just bought the Doral Country Club in Miami and got a good deal. It was purchased prior to him for $550,000. He bought it for $150 million. $550 million it was purchased prior, so he was like, this is a good deal. He also mentioned that his net worth was $7 billion at the time, and he was a little upset that there were a couple other richer people they talked about. But the comment he made was very interesting when he was just talking about this good deal in Miami and how Miami is good. He said, it's a great place to be now, especially with all these migrants coming in from Central and South America. It's a great place to do business. So here he was, making an off-the-cuff statement in 2013 about how great Miami is because of illegal immigration. But yet now, he's completely opposed to it, right? It's a setup. This guy was placed there to create chaos. Now, what I mean by chaos is not so much with him. That's his role. He's there as an actor taking all the criticism. This idea of Trump collusion was just there for one big reason, and that was to show the American people that the rule of law in America doesn't exist. There's a two-tier, there's a double standard system. If you're rich and you belong to the globalists, you don't get prosecuted. If you belong to the people that support Trump, you will. So the idea was to let Americans know that if they supported Trump, they were going to be considered racist, stupid. How many comments have you heard since Trump took office about these stupid people that go to Walmart? Oh, I can smell them a mile away, said one globalist. I mean, this has been going on ad nauseum since Trump. But see, the idea isn't that Trump gives a shit about this. He's there as an actor taking the heat, and he's being anointed as the Make America Great president. We're going to bring back America. It's never going to be coming back. This is the end of it. And he's there to show you. And really what he's doing is all of his supporters are the ones that are being ridiculed. The ones that are realizing that, wow, I'm a racist. I'm a homophobe. I don't fall into the globe. I want a wall. I'm terrible. And that's what they're doing. They're targeting what's left of America in every possible way. Politically, through our federal justice, system. They're doing it basically every other day. You hear of another hoax. Remember the Covington kids? And the left-wing media was going, boy, he's terrible because he stood his ground and stared at that Native American. He didn't do anything. Those kids didn't do anything. And they were confronted by a group of racists that were calling anybody that was white. You should hear what they were saying. So it's complete opposite. The story was covered wrong. I mean, I started looking up how many of these hoaxes basically stating that anybody white or a Trump survivor is racist, and then they have these. I mean, there's been hundreds of them all over the country. Many of them get reported as if true, and then later you find out that they're not true, they were a hoax, but nobody corrects it, right? And so the idea is placed in the mind of people. That's what a Trump supporter is. So, the latest one, we all know Jussie Smollett, the rich actor from Empire, and he decided to claim that he was beat up. They put a rope around it, was going to be lynched by two people saying, this is MAGA, Make America Great Country, get out, so here we go again. And he reports it to the Chicago police. The media jumped on that very quickly and started claiming this was truth. Also, the presidential candidates on the Democratic side didn't say this. They didn't say, we better wait for all the facts before we decide. No, they jumped on it and said, look, Trump supporters are it's a lynch mob out there who supports Trump. Now, as the story unfolded, we find out that Jussie paid two Nigerian friends he met on the cast of, not the cast, but working with the Empire, and they staged this thing for $4,000. And now the Chicago police have changed him from being a victim to a suspect. So you would think with this solid evidence, and here's how it went down. They don't say it, but they took these two guys in. They put them in separate rooms. They sang like canaries. And so we know, right down to, okay, if you tell us how much money he gave. But why would he do this? Okay, I'll get to that in a second. But let's look at the responses from the presidential candidates on the left, there's maybe 6 of them, they all said, well, now we're going to wait to see really what happens. We can't rush to judgment now. Well, why didn't they do that in the beginning? Why didn't the media outlets do that in the beginning, knowing that there's been hoax after hoax going on? Because they want to spread this narrative for a reason. And once that narrative is spread, no matter what happens to Smollett, now he'll fight it in court, and you will get people stating he's being now persecuted by the Chicago police, even though the facts won't even get close to telling you that. So on a level of pure pure false narrative, let's call it. Isn't it interesting that Trump came up with that term? Well, I mean, we've all known the media's been crooked, but he comes up with fake news now. Everybody talks about fake news. So the American people are also getting a dose of one. We've discussed now that the Trump supporters, or the last of the Mohicans in America, believe that there's a 2-tier justice system that's broken down. That was orchestrated. We realize that we have what's called the deep state in our government, that it's not controlled by duly elected officials, but it's controlled by people that are unelected, that are there for years, that support what? I believe they support the Jesuit order and the ends justify the means. And that term now is being used by the media to say that's what the left wing really is doing. So the right wing media is creating this, the ends justify the means. Well, yes, that's what they're doing. But who really should be the authors of that term? Because it's the Jesuit order. Okay? So Americans know their justice system doesn't work anymore. They realize now that their media doesn't work. So the idea of the First Amendment is gone. The idea that you have an equal justice system is gone. What about the Second Amendment and gun control? Well, that's gone, because every other day you either get a false flag about somebody shooting somebody and guns should be taken away from Americans. So that narrative is also, your Second Amendment will be gone. Now, isn't it interesting that when Trump filed his national emergency, remember, for the border, which is going on, we'll discuss that in the second half hour. But that same day, Nancy Pelosi stated that, a Democratic president can do this and say that if there's not too many guns in America, we'll declare that a national emergency and get rid of guns. The next day, what do you have? A guy supposedly shooting up all of his co-workers and policemen at a warehouse in Chicago. The next day. Is that a coincidence? So you'll see the Americans are getting a dose of where our Second Amendment's going to be gone. And then the big one. Now you got these young people headed up by this congresswoman named, Alessandra Cortez, supporting this new Green Deal, socialism in America. Now, guess who is supporting her in the Senate? A guy by the name of Senator Markey. Senator Markey, 72 years old. He went to Boston College, a Jesuit university, then went to Boston College Law School, Jesuit, and now he's been in the House of Representatives since the 70s, and now he's a senator, 72. He supports her. So where do you think the Jesuits fall in line here? Knowing that that's their government of choice, and they actually created communism and socialism in the Paraguay experiments in the 1600s. But hey, who am I to research history and not really believe and follow what the great historians from Georgetown tell us, right? Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app, for all of your mobile devices. Streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn, the Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, boys and girls, back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal, and I hope that you're watching closely to what's going on at the borders. It's an interesting story for one reason. It shows you now, right for your viewing eyes to see, globalism versus sovereignty, and who's going to win. America's right now poised at this position, and it's orchestrated, folks. This isn't something that just happened because we've got a lot of poor people in Central America. First, they have to take care and destroy those countries. So now they have nowhere else to go but here, and we'll be the next. What about Canada? Maybe that'll be a safe haven, right? Let's all go up and live in the North Woods. Hell, it's just as cold down in Southern California these days. I woke up and it was freezing. Yes, I'm not used to it anymore. I mean, I grew up in Chicago, but now it gets down to, I think I got down to 29 degrees where I was at last night. And that is cold for here. Let me tell you, you're not used to it. You don't have sweaters, jackets like you do when you live up north. So I know you people up north are going, oh, quit crying. But, you know, your body gets used to a certain type of temperature. And I remember when I lived in Colorado, after a long winter, when it was 30 degrees and sunny, I'd be out in a t-shirt. So now it's 30 degrees and sunny here, and I'm freezing my little butt off. You know, it's colder than a witch's you-know-what. I always wanted to say that on the air, but I stopped. We used to say it when we were kids. Okay, so anyway, the Jesuits, the border, Donald Trump. Over the years, folks, in this show, we've done so many stories. My mind, when I sit here, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about it, but we've gone over every possible thing that we can go over. And I know there's probably hundreds of thousands of pages of things we haven't discussed here about the deception of the Jesuits from their spiritual fanaticism, which can be, I got a quote here I can do right now. It was by Maranius de Luz. That's how they pronounced it. He was a Jesuit in 1901, by the way, he said this, at the university in Rome. And it's not long ago, huh? I mean, to them, 100 or 200, what is it, 200, 120 years or so is nothing. Nothing. But he said, the Catholic Church has the right and duty to kill heretics, because it is by fire and sword that heresy can be extirpated. For the highest good of the Church is the unity of faith, and this cannot be preserved unless heretics are put to death. All right. I love to get into the discussion of the how the Jesuits and the Vatican have really screwed over people in their, religious pursuits. And I found it interesting because my first taste of the Vatican and what they were really all about was when I knew nothing about them. Now you have to understand my history. I grew up as a Catholic boy, and I told stories about when I grew up. Okay, I never was molested or anything. So, I went through St. John Brebeuf grade school, Notre Dame high school, never had a problem. But the only thing close was when my mom died and my brother was 6 months old, and the Monsignor came over and wanted to put us in one of their Catholic orphanages, and my dad threw him out of the house, literally, physically. He could have got sued for assault and battery, but the priest ran away like a little kid. But maybe, God, can you imagine what would have happened? Whoa, boy. Thank you, Dad. But anyway, so when I was a journalist in Rome, I started learning I knew nothing, really. I started learning about their political intrigue and all these scandals, and I said, that's weird. If they're a really holy organization, why are they involved in all this stuff? And what brought it home to me was that the head of the Vatican Bank that time was the Archbishop Paul Marcinkus from Chicago, and that's my hometown, so I took an interest in this story and started to learn about the political intrigue of the Jesuits. And when I returned to America, I found it quite interesting that not many people back then knew anything about it. And I don't think many people still do. But I found that really the only people that were attacking or looking at the Vatican with a very close eye were from the spiritual side, the Bible reading people, the Bible Christians who weren't affiliated with any church. Then, of course, you had the Seventh-day Adventists who were, always at the Vatican's throat. And I started to see that there was this division between those people talking about how the Jesuits kill heretics and want to get rid of the Bible and that whole aspect. And then many of them would start to float over to the other side and saw how they worked in the secular world. But I found that the people that weren't very spiritual or had no faith didn't want to get involved in anything. They couldn't buy this story. If you put it out on a plate and said, and the facts were so obvious, people wouldn't believe it. So I started to say that it's important that people look at the spiritual and the secular side of this deceitful organization. And so I spent some time doing that. And my only regret is during the time I was doing this, I started to get to know most everybody that was writing about the Jesuits at the time. Some of the people that were in the forefront of this pursuit to let people know where the real enemy lies. And what really upset me was that there was a lot of name calling in that group as well. Let me give you 3 names to give you an idea. My first encounter with Eric Phelps, who wrote Vatican Assassins, was on my radio show, and Eric, and as I read his book, this is a book that's filled with so much information. My first idea was, how do you get all this stuff? When you talk to Eric, he's pretty knowledgeable, and I became friends with him, and he was on my show many times. Many times. Haven't spoken with him in a long time, over this idea that I don't know who to trust. Because at the same time I interviewed Tupper Saucy in his book Rulers of Evil, which I found to be quite fascinating in certain aspects of it. One, the information that Phelps seemed to either not want to give out or use to say that he, Tupper Saucy, was a Jesuit coadjutor, was actually working with the Jesuits. And then, of course, I had to draw a line, and I started looking at some of the things that Eric Phelps was saying. And he basically has so much information, but he was pushing this kind of white supremacist, let's have one state where only white people live and one state where black people live. So there's a lot of racism in his arguments that he seemed to say were biblical. And so I remember even on this radio station years ago, we had an open forum with, Tom Fress was on there, I was on, and Eric was on, and Nicholas, and we all sat there and we were basically deciding, Eric, what the hell's going on here? Why are you saying these things? Well, nothing happened. Eric stayed on the program on the radio station for a while, then he left, now he's got his own. Not many people talk about it, say it openly, but many people feel that he works with the Jesuits. And he gives you all this information, but then pulls you in this kind of racist direction as generalities. So I was caught in the middle. Both Eric and Tupper were friends of mine, and I had a hard time calling either one of them a Jesuit coadjutor because, of course, Tupper at the time when he was alive started saying things like, and I read his responses, Eric, come on, what are you saying? You're judging, you're like a inquisitor. And Eric in his book mentions that Tupper is a Jesuit coadjutor and quotes him by saying that the Jesuit General is put there by divine right and that his cousin is a Jesuit. Okay, so then he calls Tupper Saucy a Jesuit coadjutor. Now, I know over the years, so what I did is Tupper Saucy passed away, and Eric has his own thing going, and I don't talk to him much anymore. But I started to think this is really getting to be an area where it's really not productive. I mean, what happens here is how many of these people actually are put in there talking against the Jesuits, are actually there for a reason. They're there to control the opposition. No better explanation is Alex Jones. We know. I mean, I don't think there's a shadow of a doubt that he is basically a controlled opposition, talk show host, kind of the Rush Limbaugh. He reminds me of Limbaugh, doesn't he? And with that kind of raspy voice. And so when I first started talking about the Jesuits, I was on the radio station he was on, and he was quick to put me down, quick to say, this guy's crazy. And no longer was I welcome on his program. So I started to realize what he was all about, and at that point he did not have one bit of criticism. He said these were just old priests that have no money. And since then, 15 years has passed, and now he criticizes the Vatican from a standpoint that there's a good side and a bad side, and the evil, satanic Pope is in there now, but there's a really good side of the church as well. So I guess this is kind of a progression. He's given his marching orders what to say, what to do, and then goes out and does it. But he's on their side. I have no doubt about it. Eric, I sit and I go, I wish he wasn't. But there's some suspicious things. I've started reading that book. And in the beginning, I was kind of mesmerized because there's so much information in there that I didn't know about. And also coming from more of a political point of view. And then I started to say, when did this book first come out? One of the things I said about Jones was they usually place these people in positions early. They're the first ones out of the gate. For example, Jones was the first one out of the gate with Prison Planet and everything, and he's been funded to the tune of, he's probably a millionaire times over now. Then I looked and I said, well, where does this Vatican Assassins book come into play? And it was first introduced, I believe, in 2000 or 2001 on the Spotlight newspaper, which is a controlled paper, and they gave him a forum. And that's not to prove he works with them. But there were some suspicions about who published his book, things like that. And they weren't really out in the open about that. Now, I don't think it was self-published, as it's stated in his opening chapter of the book. I don't know. So all I'm saying is it got to be where there was so much strife between who is on the right side and the wrong side that nobody was believing anybody. And maybe that's how the Jesuits operate too, when you try to get at the real truth. Then another name, the last name that came to mind was Kevin Annett. And Kevin, I for a long time covered the stories regarding the Jesuits' role in the mission schools of the Native Canadians and Native Americans and how they genocided these kids. And that is a fact. I mean, these stories are amazing. And I had victims and people involved from Canada and America. And it got to a point where there was, in contemporary America, there was a law firm up in Washington State called the Tamaki Law Firm that was actually suing the Jesuits for these genocides to these Native American schools. And they reached a $200 million settlement. Of course, it was under a gag order. But I got to know the investigator, who was a Native American named Ken Bearchief, and he was a wealth of information about what was going on in the progress of getting to the truth behind how the Jesuits were involved in the genocide of these Native American native kids from all these different tribes. And the same sister story was going on in Canada. And that the head of that was kind of the guy out in front of that was Kevin Annett. Well, Ken Bearchief got to know him because they were working on basically the same story. And Ken came to me one time and said, "You better watch out for Kevin Annett. There's a lot of things that he's doing that don't make sense to me." And I kind of then started looking at what Kevin Annett was doing. He created this kind of court of whatever. It's a national court, and you hear these outlandish things about how they're going to prosecute the Pope and all this stuff. And it really started to resonate to me that something's not right with this guy. And so I got some inside information from a guy I trusted, Ken Bearchief, an investigator working on a specific story in Washington State regarding certain schools that they could prove that this genocide took place. So I started to think twice about Kevin Annett. So what I'm getting at is this whole idea of trying to get to the bottom of this story was, to me, becoming very, very, was losing ground, not gaining ground, so to speak. And so what I started to do was to not interview anybody anymore, and to basically start looking at who was coming up through the ranks talking about this stuff. And I found that most of the information is old. There's nothing really new going on. There's a lot of speculation, all these things, but there's really, it seems like less and less and less. Okay, more people know about it, but nothing ever gets done. And so we continue the quest to kind of tie things together in a different way. And I want to end the show with the border, because if you look at it from primarily being a globalist, and let's forget about the Jesuits for a moment. Let's say you're just a globalist and you don't believe America's on the right track. America was founded on slavery principles, and everything about America needs to be changed. That's exactly what globalism is all about. They want to change the face of America, forget about its history, and state that anything to do with it has been founded on the wrong principles, and they want to throw, for the lack of a better, I said I'd never use this term, but I'm going to violate my own vocabulary principles and say they're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They don't like America. They don't like what it's founded on. They want to flood the country with a new type of bring everybody that's poor into this country, open the borders. Everything else is crazy. America needs to be changed. Our system needs to be revamped. We need to give free health care, which will really suck because health care will be terrible. We need to give out free university, school all the way up till university. Well, that's not good enough. Give free master's degrees and doctor degrees. And then they want to go to raising taxes to 70%. They want to get rid of all, cars that run on gasoline. They really are stating we're not going to have any more airplanes and all of this stuff. And you had a congresswoman state that. And then she backtracked a little bit, but they want to get it out there because that's really where they're going. And like I said, her support on the Senate side comes from that guy, Senator Markey, who's from Boston College and Boston College Law School, okay? So we know where this guy's coming from, and he's been in Congress since the 70s. So they're telling you what they're going to do. So we have this border debate, and really what it is the globalists saying what I said, and anybody involved with Trump or believes otherwise is really a racist, is steeped in the past. America needs to be overhauled, changed, and the only way to do it is through globalism and socialism. Now, on the other side, you got the exact opposite. People believing in a strong border, believing in capitalism, believing in growing America, believing in creating a good infrastructure, having an organized border system, having an organized immigration system. And so Trump then takes the lead on that and starts saying, okay, we're going to do this finally. So he wants to now file the national emergency to strengthen the border. And since then, you've heard nothing from the left but, no, you can't do this. This is terrible. It's not founded. It's unconstitutional. Well, the national emergency powers were given by Congress in the 70s. There's been over 55 to 60 of these passed for reasons like to protect democracy in Lebanon, but to protect our democracy is a travesty. I didn't see 16 states file any lawsuits against Obama when he declared the swine flu a national emergency and when he declared an emergency that had nothing to do, not even close to the problems that we have on the border. But now 16 states have lined up against the American people, and I'm not saying Trump only, but the people who support him, and are saying he doesn't have the authority to control our borders. To me, folks, this shows you exactly where we are and how far the Jesuits have come with their idea of chaos, of dividing and conquering, and how they use the Hegelian dialectic to do that. The border is the perfect issue. And with this problem in Venezuela now, with thousands and thousands of people going to be coming here, it's imperative you understand that they're doing that instead of taking a side on this, which you should, but understand where it's coming from. Now, of course, even though I know that the Jesuits have this plan of socialism and they will succeed, I take the side of being with the side of nationalism and capitalism, to a point that you can't realize what they're going to do to this world if, even if you take a stand, and we know we can't stop them. This is going to be amazing how it's all lining up right now. And I want people to look at it from a different point of view, at least for a while, and say, listen, it isn't because you have bad guys only on the left or the right. Folks, they all work together. Lindsey Graham, the senator on the right, stating American principles, is no different than Chuck Schumer on the left, who wants globalism, because they can't get their way unless there is this conflict. And by creating this conflict and rubbing these two groups together, globalism and American nationalism, you're going to get the outcome, and it isn't going to be pretty, because you know as well as I do who is going to win in the end. And America one day will never be the same. Never, never, never. But one person reminded me, never say never, Greg. All right. Let's hold out some vestige of hope that something happens. And please, someone out there, tell me what that something could be. Right? Give me something. You know how they say, give me something to work on here, will you? But anyway, let's see what happens in Venezuela. Let's see how the border thing shakes out. And I'll see you tomorrow on the Investigative Journal.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.